just before I turn it over to Ms. Scheid, that is what you were describing in terms of the complexity of the decision and the weight of the decision. That is why we went out earlier than almost every district in the state of Ohio. You know, we went out early because we were so sort of frustrated with the timing from the state that we decided we just needed to go out. I think all of the surrounding districts appreciated that because, you know, you never want to be first, but we were really in this, this entire region and across our Ohio 8 districts that we wanted to go out early because the decisions were going to be so incredibly complex and needing to have these kind of rich discussions. We do have a recommendation for delaying the start for those teacher prep days. I'll just say right now, I would hope that we would make some good decisions within this next week, because once you get past that, even if we do that delay start, we still have to give time for our families to prepare. We still have to, we're working diligently on childcare offerings, and we be able to nail down, you know, dates with them. There's so many moving parts and pieces to this complex puzzle that the later the model decision, then we can't pull the trigger on so many other things. And so I'll just leave it there. So decision 2, I'll turn it over to Ms. Scheid.
So I think we can all agree that the whole issue about face masks is certainly a nationwide issue. And if you look at what's been happening over the last number of weeks and last number of months, we can also agree that perhaps it's become a very politicized issue rather than a health and science issue. We do know, and the data supports, that the best way for everybody to protect each other is to wear a face mask. That was our initial recommendation from you, that every body in the buildings, every student, every adult in the buildings would wear face masks, from our youngest students on up and all of our adults and educators. And that is the recommendation we're making tonight. We have not changed that. We have had conversations about the possibility of face shields being provided to our K-2 population of students. We would want you to look at the data also on that a face shield certainly does not give the same protection that a face mask would. And certainly look at the possibility of at least trying face masks even for our youngest students, or using both face masks and face shields when needed. But we are recommending that all students and all staff wear face masks, and that should anyone have a, with the exception of medical exceptions, and those even need to be qualified as to what that is. It's our belief that if there's a student or a staff member, certainly we're providing the option of 100% online learning for students that would not want to, if they did not have a medical reason and would not want to wear a face mask, or their parents would not want them to wear a face mask, we're certainly providing them an option to work 100% online. So the recommendation is to continue to have everyone that's in the building to be wearing face masks.
And President Bravo, I think because these are shorter discussions, I think we'll go through the rest of the decision points and then have another round of questions, if that's okay with you.
Yes, thank you.
Decision number 3 is the number of students on the bus. We brought last time with you, this has shifted a little bit, that we brought 2 kind of models that showed every other seat on the bus that would get us all the way down to 11 students. And then we showed what's on the slide on the left-hand side, if every single seat, and we were getting support from the Summit County Public Health and Ohio Department of Health, that the seat itself kind of serves as that barrier. That's 22 students per bus. On the right-hand side, Summit County Public Health, and this was reinforced in separate discussions just with the district and with all of the administrators in the county, also is approving and supporting 2 students per seat with pretty extraordinary, other safety provisions in place. So masks for all students, roof vents and windows vented to get the fresh air in the bus, hand sanitizing before they come in. There's a whole host of things that need to be in place if you're going to do that. Instead of 3 students per seat, it's 2 students in a seat. Now, we may not need that in every bus, depending on the model that you pick, but that would be the option. And if we picked that option, the implication is that if you supported having 2 students per seat with all those extensive health provisions, that we could keep the same schedules, the start time and end time for our schools as is. If we end up having to go to the 22 students per bus, we will most likely have to triple or quadruple bus routes. So we may have to have some schools, like elementary schools, start later in the day, like at 9 o'clock, like we've had to do at 400 West Market, and alter the start times to be able to accommodate that. So that is a decision point that we're going to, and our recommendation is, with all the health provisions, is the 44 students on the bus, knowing not every bus will have that maximum load. It depends, especially if you go with the models where only half of the students are going at a time. But so that's why our recommendation tonight is the 2 students per seat with the extensive health provisions in place. Michelle? So
the question as to, and it's a absolutely legitimate concern, is that because of the impact of COVID on our community, because of increased financial burden on many of our families, and the stress to make sure that their student or their child is in a uniform on a daily basis. The question has arisen, should we waive the uniform requirement for this coming school year? The feedback I've been getting from families, certainly from teachers, is that that certainly should not be a problem. We're recommending that the uniform policy be waived for the coming school year, with the provisions that, and some of the reasons that we have a uniform policy to begin with, is that we would want certainly an idea of a protocol for when a student shows up in person in class with inappropriate clothes on, and also if they show up, if we get into the colder weather with hoodies, certainly we would not want the students to have the ability to wear a hoodie over their head and have a face mask on, just so that we can be able to communicate with the students. So those minor decisions and details would have to be worked out, but we certainly are recommending that families have the option this year to send their students to school without uniforms.
And Dan Rambler has already pulled the last dress code that we had before uniforms for K-8, and taking a look at that. He'll circulate that among some teachers and principals just to get feedback, but we may be able to just kind of look at what was there in the past and bring that back just for that 1-year waiver. But we'll have that prepared for you by the next board meeting. Here's the additional staff prep days. The current is on the left-hand side, that we have 3 days of staff training and prep. And what we're proposing is that students start 1 week later. That adds additional 5 days to design those remote lessons. And the remote lessons means, for the remote teachers to do that, but also for our core teachers to be prepared for what types of assignments they're they're handing off to kids on those self-directed remote days and the Friday remote days, training on health and safety procedures and working through all those routines that'll be needed in the building to be able to keep both our staff and our students safe. And so it would literally just pick up the calendar and just go 1 week later, and we would maintain the same transition days that we have listed.
And then the procedures for health checks. Again, this is something that logistically is extremely challenging. The feedback that we've been getting on this end is that there's a concern if we do not do at minimum a temperature check at the building. I know that we've talked about the ability for possibly parents checking their student at home, teachers checking themselves at home prior to getting there. The concern obviously is if that doesn't happen, that we have either symptomatic or asymptomatic students or staff or both in the buildings. I don't know logistically. I know the considerations are there about the cost of doing that, how that would be done at, again, minimally checking temperatures on a daily basis, but that's something that I think we need more details and we'll talk about more.
And we're preparing some different options for how some of our staff have been meeting with some vendors who have some self-check apps that could be used for that. We also, Mr. Alexander actually sent some picture and a quote for a device for temperature that they use at the courthouse. So we'll look at those options. It's not just pricing options, but it's logistically, how would we actually achieve that goal of having some kind of symptom check routine that happens as students enter the school day. So we'll have a recommendation for you next week with some options.
And also have the ability to ensure that it was done.
Yeah.
With our students. So our proposed next steps. So we're reviewing this and making or underscoring the recommendations we've already made. Currently, prior to Dr. Hall actually and several of you saying that, having the discussion about not rushing this through, but understanding that some of the decisions have to be made whether we like it or not in a certain timely manner. You have scheduled a special board meeting to finalize the reopening plans for this coming Monday or next Monday, July 20th. Certainly you'll have to talk about if that's what you want to continue to do and the time frame you want to continue following. The selection form for parents as far as selecting whether they want their student to be 100% remote or participate in a blended learning model. Those selection forms will go out July 21st, and they'll be required to have those back and make that decision by July 31st. We did speak about locking those decisions in for at least a semester, only because of space and staffing needs. So once the parents do decide one way or the other which model they wanted to follow, that would be locked in for the semester.
And you can see that if we get this information by July 31st, that gives 2 weeks for families to learn more deeply about the models. We'll have all that information posted. We'll be able to do that live chat and help desk to help them sort through and answer all their questions. We can do, video conferencing type support. Our communications team has a whole schedule mapped out on how we'll hit the ground running from that July 21st, just specifically about the models, which is why we'd like this week to go ahead and start to get out the other information on all the health things that we're doing and sanitizing and all of that. So they already have that piece. So then they're only focusing more on the school models. But after that July 31st, there's a huge amount of work because then we're going to have to do that matching of staff to here's how many remote students and here's how many face-to-face, and doing everything that you all have already described about making sure that we've got the right staff at the right grade levels here. We've got the right staff and right grade levels and content areas for the remote students. That is going to take time to sort through all of that, which is why we need that month of August, those really first 2 weeks of August, 3 weeks of August to finish all of that work. And then we can make sure that everyone knows their assignment. So that's why we're recommending this. These are our proposed next steps in terms of the flow of deadlines and information. So now we can open it up to questions.
All right, and I'll pay attention to the chat if you'd like to get in line for the questions. I will start just, you've mentioned a couple of times about a special board meeting on the 20th. We don't currently have one scheduled, although there is a finance committee meeting at 4:30. Are you suggesting the 20th or the week of the 20th? And if the 20th, then we might want to get something out to the board members to make sure that folks are available.
I think ideally, and you're right, it was discussion, not necessarily a firm date. This is our proposed next step, is there was a finance committee meeting already scheduled that maybe that could turn into a special board meeting. But obviously that's, up to you, Mr. President, in terms of how you want to schedule that.
Okay. Let's start with Dr. Akbar, then Dr. Hall, Ms. Mansfield, Ms. Autry. Dr. Akbar?
Yes. So I have a few questions, but I have a statement too. So first I want to say that I don't think that I'll be ready to make a decision in a week from today with receiving a final report on Friday. So I would suggest that we plan to have at least 2 meetings. My other suggestion would be that we, as a board, this is my proposal, as a board, just make the decision to delay start to the middle of September to allow us time to work through this, and also give them time to work through all the details. I don't see how we can make that decision with the timeline that's laid out. And so with that, I wanted to go to something that Ms. Shipe said about students locking in or families locking into a plan and not being able to change it for the semester. I think that does work for everything. But the in-person, I think that the in-person, if you choose the in-person option, if that's 100% or what have you, the in-person option that there's there for whatever grade you're in, that there needs to be an opt-out at any point to go to 100% remote for whatever reason. I think that is, locking them into in-person is not a good practice. And so we should be flexible to have at any point someone move to remote learning. So that is one comment that I had. I have a whole lot others, but the last thing I'll just share today is that, I think that the waiver of the uniform policy is just an example of one of those equity things that I've been talking about. And I would like for us to move away from the uniform policy altogether. It's to eventually be able to have that conversation. But I also want to be cautious of us forbidding students from having a hoodie on with their mask. I think hoodies is something that you were going to wear in the winter. And we are living in COVID realities. And so you're going to have to wear a mask, and forbidding a student from having both during this time, I think leads us down a slope that is not going to be helpful for us and it sends a bad message, Trayvon Martin type of message to our students. And I want to be very mindful that we do the very opposite of that. And again, I said I have a whole lot of other questions, but I'll save them. So that those are the main things that I want to say.
If I could clarify that comment, please. I was not suggesting that they not be allowed to wear hoodies. Certainly, I believe that they should be allowed to wear hoodies. The concern from our teachers has been when they put the hood up on the hoodie and pull it closed so their entire face is being covered. That's a concern from our teachers. It's certainly not that they cannot wear a hoodie to school. I think that they should have the ability to wear a hoodie to school and have in the past, certainly our secondary students. The concern with the locking in on a schedule was that I think the problem logistically is from students coming from 100% remote and going to in-person classes, not the other way around. I agree with you on that one, Dr. Alpler.
Right. Thank you. And I also want to share that I don't want to be dismissive of teachers' concerns at all. I'm very pro-teacher, but I'm also very understanding of cultural realities and the way things play out. And so we really would have to, and this isn't a time for today, but we would really have to drill down what that concern comes from and where that concern comes from. And I would say that I think we should just stay away from that topic altogether because that is problematic for it could lead to cultural and racial bias instances, and I just would stay away from it.
I 100% agree, and I think we're on the same page. I absolutely agree with you, and acknowledge that it does go to cultural and racial biases. I agree with that.
Good, thank you, Dr. Hall.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. So I've got questions regarding decision points. And was it 2, 3, and 6? So if you could scroll back to that second decision point around the mask, and I'll start there. So I think it was pointed out, and rightly so, that the wearing of masks has been politicized a great deal. And I think we all know where we all know where I stand on it. I think we're all on the same page that people should be wearing masks. But my question, though, is we use the word recommend. And I raised this question at the last board meeting as well, when we discussed this topic point. And I think, Ms. Feidel, if you're on the line, I think you were doing some research on this for us, on the legality of us trying to require, again, you know where I stand on it. But again, I can envision a scenario where people would push back parents and or kids on them being required to wear a mask. So I guess my first question: are we recommending or are we requiring?
No, this is that word is Pat Shipe and our planning team is recommending to you to require personal protective face coverings for all K-12 students and staff. So that's our recommendation to you, that we are recommending K-12 required personal face coverings, face masks for all students and staff K-12.
Okay, roger
and
that.
we believe similar to, we require uniforms in K-8, and we require specific forms that families have to provide. We require a lot in a school environment, and we see this as one more requirement that is going to keep our children and staff safe.
Yeah, roger that. So I appreciate that. And so that's where I was looking for. But again, this has the idea of mask has kind of taken on its own identity, if you will. And so that's where, to me, I just want to make sure that we're covered. Should there be some sort of pushback or legal challenge around us trying to require folks to wear a mask? Because again, the federal government has not required masks. The state has not required masks in all settings. So as an entity that is a recipient of federal and state funds, I wonder if we have, sort of the legal right, if you will, to require it. Again, I think we should. That's not why I'm asking my question, because I have a problem with it. I just want to make sure that if we go this route of making this recommendation, that we then don't end up, with a legal fight on our hands. And so that's where I know, Ms. Feidel, I think you'd referenced in a previous meeting that you were doing some research on this. I didn't know if you had anything that you wanted to share with regard to that this evening.
Yes, Dr. Hall, this is Ms. Feidel. I think that's something that we can certainly discuss at a later time.
Okay. Okay. Please, let's make sure that we circle back around and do that, because I know I've asked that question at 2 successive board meetings now. So I'll pivot and go to my sort of decision point number 3. So that slide around the busing. I wanted to ask again. I mean, full disclosure, I work in healthcare and kind of eat, drinking, and breathing this right now. And so when we say that the Sumner County Public Health Department is supporting this particular plan, what is that support based on? Is that based upon a CDC guideline and American Academy of Pediatrics guideline? What is that based on? And the reason why I ask that question is because what I'm really looking for is some internal consistency in sort of what we do, right? So we're talking about maintaining 6 feet in buildings, but we're not going to maintain 6 feet on school buses. I could see that kind of being a wedge issue that people would use, to sort of, create questions in the minds of certain folks in the community about why we do what we do. So I wanted to ask, so where does that come from? What's the underlying study or whatnot that the health department is referencing in this recommendation?
Since Mrs. Folk has been living and breathing this transportation issue and in ongoing discussions with all of our health experts, I'll let her answer that.
Good evening. How are you all? This particular recommendation, Mr. Hall, comes from the fact that if we go to try to transport the students that qualified and are eligible for transport and go from a 66 passenger bus down to 22 students per bus, which is the one on the left, then we do not have the capacity to transport most of your students to school when talking to the health department. The goal was to have students in K through 2 and pre-K be eligible to be face-to-face 5 days a week. If we do not have a full capacity on a bus, and we're not going to go there, but went down to 24 students or 22 students to a bus, then we would need 70 more buses and drivers and mechanics to get us up to, which is a 2/3 decrease. To go 1/3 below, we can make it. We can actually get most of the students to school for APS plus the 57 other locations that we are required by state mandate to consider transport between a yellow bus, a Metro bus, and other facilities. So Metro is currently requiring masks. They helped Metro write the plan, and they went ahead and helped us write it with the stipulations as written there. They felt that if we can follow these correctly, yes, it is not the social spacing that would be ideal. And to be honest with you, if you really want our students to be maxed out at as close to 6 feet as possible, then we're down to 10 students to a bus, or 11 at the max. And we were trying to make sure that parents who wanted their students in school, especially at that K-8 level, would be given the opportunity to be given the transport to the best of our ability while keeping the students and the drivers as safe as possible. So it was truly working with Summit County Health Department and putting these stipulations together that we could move this forward. And this is a recommendation to you for consideration.
And I think one of the key differences between a classroom and a bus is the air circulation that you can have, as we're reading more and more in terms of the science behind that fresh air circulation. You can accommodate that in a bus, and that can't happen as readily in a classroom setting or in a hallway or cafeteria. So I think that's a significant difference. We've also been watching carefully what's happening with our metro buses and the safety. And you also think about the amount of time on a bus isn't as extensive as sitting all day in a classroom with a cohort of students.
So I appreciate that. And I think to that point, you know, Dr. McWilliams-Woods, I think that's the point to lead with, right? When challenged on that, right? I mean, you know, and I appreciate Ms. Volk's comments as well, but you know, the way that's kind of come, I mean, the way it sounds is that we're saying, well, you know, there's an inconvenience here, and we need to be able, we need to get students to school. So we're compromising the safety first mentality to get, you know, in order to get students to school on a bus. So that's where I think the point you made, Dr. McWilliams, I think that's the point to lead with, is the lack of time on the bus and the airflow and, you know, and yada, yada, yada. Because again, I think that the first sort of way that we sort of addressed that made it sound like, you know, it's inconvenient. And so we can't get students to school unless we compromise on the safety and the 6 feet, we can't get kids to school, you know? So, and I know that's not what Ms. Volk meant, but I'm saying that, that you know, who are listening on the line, you know, and people who are going to play this back. Some of my comments are calculated to sort of to be talking to them as well, obviously. So again, so I think the point you made around, please.
And so much of this will also depend on, you know, if we get the 10% or more students going remotely, that's also taking numbers out of our whole transportation routing. So, you know, this recommendation would be, you know, looking at a full bus if we needed to do that, but knowing there's a lot of factors that could reduce those numbers. We could have more families choose to drive their own children. We could have more kids doing the remote, and all of that would reduce our capacity on the buses. And then we can have more of that distance.
Gotcha. Thank you. And so moving on to my last question, which is around related to decision point number 6, procedures for health checks. So again, I know I asked some of these questions at the last board meeting as well. So apologies for being redundant in that regard. But as we sort of think through the symptom check routine, I know that I think we referenced talking to certain folks. Have we talked to Suma Health or Akron or Cleveland Clinic Akron General? Because again, because these are two health systems, you know, that have thousands of employees. I think 7,000, I think 5,400 at Akron General Cleveland Clinic. And they are engaged in symptom checks on a day-to-day basis, you know, in their admin buildings and hospitals and things like that. Or the county for that matter, looking at, talking to Summit County as well, right? So Ms. Mansfield, thank you for that. So again, so those might be people that I would talk to, because again, they can speak intelligently, with regard to sort of what devices they're using, and what are the best practices of trying to symptom check hundreds of people that are coming into a building all within a half an hour period of time. So again, I just would encourage us to reach out to our health systems and, i.e. and the county as well, to kind of, figure out sort of what they're doing. Again, because there's some really smart people working for those places.
We will definitely have our health team do that. So thank you.
Sure. And then as an aside, we have a local resource as we're sort of thinking about Corona in general. There's a physician at Suma, and first of all, I work there. So this is not me showing a bias, but there's a physician there, Dr. Tom File. He's an infectious disease doc there. And this physician is the president of like the National Infectious Disease. I'm not going to get the organization's name right, so I'm not going to try. But the guy is nationally known in ID, and has been sought after as it relates to COVID. He might be a person I'd be happy to put the team in contact with him as well. He might be a person that we might want to consider consulting, with respect to some of these questions. And then last but not least, the documentation component, right? So as we, and I know that this is not fully baked yet, so I get that, but as we're sort of thinking about how we clean and how we symptom check, there ought be sort of policies and procedures that sort of lay this out, with a high level of specificity. And then the question becomes, how then are we monitoring, that those plans are being followed? So we say that we're going to clean 3 times a day. Is there a log in the buildings that we're, that someone is signing to verify initially that they've done the cleaning, and then who audits that, right? So again, if you look at the retail space and take Walmart as an example, Walmart, Target, these are buildings where they've got salary members of management who have as part of their responsibility now that their job is basically to be auditing and ensuring, you know, that the folks who say that they're doing the cleaning are actually doing it. You know, and so that to me is a critical part of this. You know, and again, it's the part of the job that, you know, is probably the, you know, the one that no one really wants to do, is that tracking and compliance component. But again, you know, if we're going to be serious and consistent about the cleaning and whatnot, and ensuring that that's happening, we've got to have in place a system where we're documenting that and double and triple checking that. So
I agree wholeheartedly. And we have talked about, this is the time when there's no corners that get cut. And the only way to really make sure is to carefully monitor and have that kind of accountability structure, and to make sure we're training folks accurately on how it needs to be done, and not thinking just a one-time training will do it. Certainly.
Yeah. And that's all I had. So thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And if we can, want to make a note for the record too. Mr. Alexander had to leave the meeting, but he did let me know in advance that he had a hard stop at 8:15 this evening. He is okay, of course, with us continuing. And I'm going to ask for a slightly unusual request, because we still have 3 board members that have questions and comments left to make, but we're in this unique virtual environment. I'm going to ask for a very brief motion, or a motion for a very brief recess. I've heard from a couple folks that need just a minute for a comfort break. So if we can please have a motion for a recess.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed?
I'm not opposed, but I have a point of inquiry.
Yes.
How long is this recess?
Let's call it less than 5 minutes here. Is that okay? And this is from your fellow board members. I need just to step away from the screen for a moment, but don't want to miss part of the conversation. All right. Anyone opposed?
Sorry.
All right. Hearing none, we are going to recess. It is 7:26. We will call the meeting back out of recess at 7:31. On your mark, get set, go. All right, we are 1 minute away. Mr. Rittenhouse, are we still live, or do you want me to ask you for a heads up? Thank you so much. It is 8:31. If I could make sure that everyone has returned. See Ms. Autry, Dr. Hall. Ms. McKittrick, are you good?
I'm here.
Dr. Akbar, are you good? Thank you. And Ms. Mansfield? I'm just looking for Ms. Mansfield to join us again. All right, it looks like we are all back. Ms. Mansfield, are you good to go? All right. She is back on, so we are good to go. Thank you for being patient with us. We still have some board members who have questions and comments. We still have some items on the agenda, and we still have an executive session coming up, so we appreciate the patience. We are back in session for our regular board meeting for July 13th, 2020. For those of you watching or those of you just joining us, Ms. Mansfield, you are next in line with questions if you would like to go ahead. All right, she has messaged me. I know she is back on. Ms. Autry, would you like to go ahead and we will circle back to Ms. Mansfield?
Sure, thank you very much. And Dr. Hall actually touched upon my question regarding the health checks. But I did just want to ask, and I know you guys are still fleshing it all out. Are we anticipating possibly just expanding job descriptions, or Because it sounds to me like we're going to need like a whole department, a separate department. And I can't imagine adding anything on the plate of teachers. I mean, we're all already going to have to pitch in as far as, you know, keeping everybody safe. But to add any further duties to teachers, I don't want to see that happen. So I just wanted to know, were there any preliminary discussions about, you know, is Akron Children's Hospital, who we contract with already, are they going to help us fill the gaps with these health checks?
We certainly have had those discussions, and Ms. Shipe and I actually asked the health advisory team to start to code when, you know, we have a lot of lists that say, well, this is going to be clean and this is going to be clean. We're going to have this done and this done. And so we asked them to start coding, like, who is actually going to start doing that? And we need to start honing in on which position would make sense for the type of activity, so that we can identify gaps that we have and figure out how to close them. Certainly the health clinics, they've been working very closely with Mrs. Folk on how to receive the students who maybe are exhibiting some symptoms, how to isolate them in separate clinics that have already been identified. Like, that whole process has been worked out pretty tightly with all of our nurses and health aides that work in our schools. So I feel good about that. It's all these other areas that we're still working through to make sure that we've got who's doing what, where, and what is feasible and realistic to keep everybody safe.
So do you anticipate we're going to need a significant more staff to help with these health checks when I think about the numbers in our buildings?
Yeah, I think the day-to-day process will be able to accommodate the entry check until we know exactly how that's going to work on any kind of symptom checks that happen upon entry or during the day. I think that will decide, you know, how we're going to do that. Our goal through all of this, certainly because of the financial strain on the district, as we've been talking about finances on the other side, is to be cautious, but at the same time, we've got to be able to meet the needs of our students in terms of safety and our faculty. So we know that we keep saying all hands on deck in terms of looking at positions that maybe are in a normal stance would be doing something different, but we have to prioritize health right now. So we're not at a place where we can look at all of that yet until we get these details lined up. But we know that we're going to have to be flexible in terms of our use of staff, and our teachers need to be focused on the educating our students. So I appreciate what you said about not one more thing in terms of monitoring, but until we get that tight list, we're going to have to just kind of wait until we get that full list done and start putting positions next to it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mansfield?
Sorry about that. I was muted and didn't realize it. So I have the grace of going after some of my brilliant colleagues who've already asked a lot of the questions that I had on my list. So thank you guys. One of the ones I wanted to emphasize was the uniform policy waiver. We were already looking at our uniform policy with our student board members last year and trying to figure out what changes we could make. So maybe this just pushes that conversation forward. So thank you, Dr. Akbar, for bringing that up. And Dr. Hall, I would also agree that it is a complicated thing to ask people to make a decision right now about whether they're going to be 100% online or not. And that I understand jumping to the classroom would be complicated, but there may be issues that come up in families or things like that. I want to make sure that we're giving them the option to opt out if things are tough. So that leaves me to two things. First, I would recommend that the health team look to or talk to the COVID teams with the county. Summit County Public Health will have information on what that entails. See if we can't get some help from the folks that are using are being put to work using CARES Act money. I know that they've been used at the courthouse, they've been used at the Akron Zoo. So I would ask that maybe they reach out and get some information on that. And then my big question would be the non-air conditioned buildings. Now, we know it's 2020, and we know for sure that somehow, some way, we're going to end up with those 90-degree days, and somehow they're going to probably last into mid-October the way we're going. So I am very concerned about our buildings, who, not just for our students and the heat that they're going to face wearing a mask and being in a non-air conditioned building, but also the health aspects with blowing fans on them that may actually, be a hazard. I'm not sure what the research is on that. And also our staff, because I know what it's like to walk from my car to the building that I'm in, and it's air conditioned, and it's so ridiculously uncomfortable on these really hot days. And a still classroom sounds like just an awful experience. And I want to make sure that we're looking at that. I know I've mentioned it to Dr. James and Dr. McWilliams-Woods, but I'd like to hear if there's any plan that can be shared with the board. Thank you.
And we also, I might add, we've talked about that. Many of those non-CLCs, or the buildings that have not been replaced yet, also are going to have issues even with the 6-foot social distancing as far as the size of their classrooms versus the size of our classrooms within CLCs.
We have a generated list of options for the buildings that Deborah Folk and the operations team are working through to see what the best option is, because we all share the concern that the buildings already are oftentimes treacherous, where we've got to have calamity days because of heat, and then you add the requirement of masks on top of that, and I think we all share that concern. So we are not at a place to give you a recommendation tonight, but know that we're going through options, crossing out which ones are impossible that we can't do, but we're looking at any ways to get relief.
Thank you, Ms. Mansfield. Any follow-up?
No, thank you.
All right, Ms. McKittrick.
Thank you. With regard to number one, the school models, can you speak to that with regard to special ed, gifted and talented, and English language learners? Thank you.
For the students with disabilities, we didn't duplicate that slide again because it's the same recommendation that our students who have our most severe disabilities, and it's based on the percentage of students that are in their resource rooms. And we've got an actual that'll be on our website, kind of that differentiation of who are we talking about, because that was a question that came up, that our students with disabilities will be in that 5 with severe disabilities, primarily students served in our multi-disability classrooms and our classrooms for students with autism. Those students will be 5 days a week and a regular full day because they're already social distanced, because the class sizes typically are below 8 students and oftentimes smaller than that. So we'll be able to accommodate them. And other students with disabilities, the IEP team will look at the models that are for their grade level and look to see how to arrange the services during that time. And for some of the grade levels, like in middle school, there may be additional time that a student could come in with intervention specialist. So that will all be worked out individually based on the needs of the students. For our gifted students, again, all those services will flow. The staff are there in the building. Once we hone in on the model, then they'll be able to work within the model to provide services to the maximum extent, either whether that's remotely or whether that's during the face-to-face time based on the schedule. We've got teams working on all of those kind of mock schedules for the models that we presented to you, and they're doing just that, like looking at all the parts and pieces that have to happen. Same thing with our English learners and the support that they get, that some of that can happen remotely, some can happen face-to-face, depending on how the schedules work out.
Thank you, that's all.
Good, thank you. Any other questions from anyone else?
Yeah, this is Dr. Hall. I actually have a couple follow-up questions I'd like to jump in with. So first, I just want to come back around full circle and kind of echo sort of what I led off with a couple hours ago now, as we enter our third hour of meeting this evening. What or where is the venue where whether it's us as the board, or our senior staff, and or in concert with Ms. Shipe and her team, what venue are we going to use to sort of have the conversations around sort of teacher safety? Because candidly, we haven't talked about that much tonight. And so I'm just asking, when is that, when and where is that going to take place? Because I'd like to be a part of that. And some of the questions I've got that teachers have sent me, wanting me to ask tonight on the line, that I kind of led off with around what happens to teachers that decline to return to school. Does it impact their teaching assignments? What buildings they're in? If you get sick as a teacher from COVID, can you file workman's comp? And what about the liability issues? If I'm a teacher and my husband gets sick because I give him COVID because I got exposed at school, who's paying, or my grandfather, gets it because I exposed it to him. I mean, like how are we addressing some of these things, and what venue are these kinds of questions going to be asked and answered in? Because we're not going to talk about it tonight because we're through all the, those 6 key decision points, and other questions, right? So sort of student code of conduct. I mean, I'm getting questions that are piling in on my phone right now as we're sitting here from teachers who are watching right now, asking me questions around board expectations for student code of conduct. So if a student refuses to wear a mask, what is the intended outcome? So again, when I say that board members are being inundated, we're being inundated. And so to me, so I guess my question in all this is not that we're going to answer all this tonight, but one more log, and that is, the liability components that accompany all this, So I just want to know what venue or are we going to use to have those conversations? So that's my last remaining question, and I appreciate all the patience you all have shown in answering my questions, and I know I've asked a lot of them. So so thank you in advance.
All the first part of your question related to all the human resource type questions, or the and I will push back actually very heavily on your statement that we haven't been talking about faculty safety, because I feel like everything that we're talking about is involving faculty safety. If we weren't talking about faculty safety right now, we would be bringing a plan to have everybody come back with 2 feet or less social distancing. And I've said repeatedly that faculty, we need to be more concerned about faculty because they are in the age range. I am hugely concerned about our students, absolutely. But our safety for our faculty, that's why we have the plan that we have, because we're balancing both very carefully every step of the way. The second thing that you asked about, all of those human resource procedures, like with the sick leave and what happens if you quarantine, all of that. Pat Shipe and I met with Kathy McVeigh, and we started listing out all of we already have a major list of all those questions, but we really started digging into and adding some of those procedures that have to be tightly nailed down. Within our normal procedures, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act. There's laws that still cover a lot of that, but this is such a new area that we identified specific areas with Mrs. McVeigh that we all need to be a part of that discussion. So know that is, and Mrs. McVeigh has been working with her team diligently on trying to get all of these parts and pieces in place on how people will express their even their ability to come back to work and things like that. And the second part, you talked about student behavior. Ms. Shipe and I have a meeting on, it's either tomorrow or Wednesday, with our student behavior advisory. That's an existing advisory, and that the agenda of that meeting is to start to look at all of the other issues that we have. If a student doesn't wear a mask, how are we going to handle those types of things? Some of the new things that are sort of COVID related in this time period, and how we're going to handle that.
So I appreciate your response. Again, my comments were not calculated to be taken as we're not taking into account teacher safety. I'm just saying that, me as an individual board member, I'm not satisfied yet that we talked about it enough, at least in my hearing. So maybe there have been other conversations, and that's fair, Dr. McWilliams-Woods. Maybe there have been other conversations that have taken place offline with other parties. But I'm saying in the time that we have spent in board meetings, I, as an individual board member, expressing my opinion, I could wish that we had spent more time, answering or talking through some of the nuances, if you will, of our faculty safety. But again, that's just my position. So certainly respect yours as well.
Thank you, Dr. Akbar.
Yes. So I have two final things. One, I think I shared this earlier about my thought around having more flexibility between our staff, not just the faculty who are teaching in the classroom, but also other staff around their choice of returning and having more flexibility with that and not forcing them to return. I think that we need to come up with some type of new procedure. So I'm wondering, my question is, has there been new procedures or processes created to ensure that our staff receive the highest consideration of flexibility of returning?
We are working on. I heard some feedback. That's what I was talking about with the identification of the human resource procedures that are in place. Some of that may be captured with some of our current procedures, but we know and recognize that there's going to be additional, that Mrs. McVeigh has been capturing and starting to work on those procedures. And then, and we'll be able to bring, a package together in terms of how we're going to follow those procedures. Many of them follow our typical procedures in place, but there's certainly, and that's what we identified in our meeting last week, there's some unique things that obviously we have to address.
Okay. I just want to just say again that I think that nothing about COVID is typical. And so the procedures and processes in which we put in place should be very atypical. And we should be looking at those type of innovative models that aren't just following the same typical process. I shared this with the racism presentation, but this is just in general, even about just now, the biggest complication we have to progress is we've always done it this way. And so I think that everything that we're doing, including these processes for our staff for flexibility, should take off the table of this is how we've always done it. And one idea that, I have, so we got an email from someone who's 70 years old working for the district. That's a high risk, that's naturally known as a high risk age group. And so why should we require that person to submit any type of health condition paperwork from their doctor? We should be working with them to work out a work from home plan. And so those type of things are things we should be doing, and the burden should be on us or on the district, not on the staff members. So I just wanted to make sure I reiterated that I'm very strong on that. And then the last thing I have, which is not related to that necessarily, but it's related to something that's been in the news a lot. As we think about reopening, there's been conversations and comments by the Secretary of Education stating that all schools should reopen fully or face penalty of reduction in federal funds. And we receive a lot of our $500 million budget. A lot of that comes from federal funds, as I know everyone here knows. And I know Ryan's on the call, but have we heard anything about implications of those comments yet, and how that might factor into our district?
I'll let either our superintendent or Mr. Pendleton take that one.
I haven't heard anything, regarding that rhetoric coming from Washington. I think a lot of folks, their opinion is it may not even be legal for them to withhold those federal funds, and they actually don't go directly to school districts, they go to the state. So it's a little more complex than to just say, well, if Akron decides to stay closed and do all remote learning and not reopen for in-person, I don't know how the feds could take that money away from us when the money legally goes to the states, and the states by formula then, distributes that money to the different school districts. So we haven't heard anything else from anyone regarding that.
Thank you. Mr. Pendleton, did you want to weigh in?
No, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I've talked to ODE about this in specifics. And we have very strict rules, as you can imagine, and even adding some supplement, not supplant rules to the monies we've already received back to March 13th. So we've got to jump through some extra hoops. But we understand that there is an additional allocation of about $100 million that we're waiting to see what and how those funds are disseminated coming up. So hopefully we get a few more dollars to assist in this transition as you see how comprehensive this is going to be.
Thank you. Are there any other questions related to the presentation?
I don't have any more questions. I just have a general comment as we sort of close out. I know that a lot of work obviously has gone into this. I know I've asked a lot of passionate questions tonight. And so my only hope is that we're all, smarter than we were 3 hours ago, and trying to sort of, think through some of these issues. And I think the one thing that we all can strive to do better is communicate with each other as well as with our constituents. I've asked some questions tonight, and some of the responses I've gotten is that, well, we've been working on this. We've been talking about this. And so the question I would kind of pose sort of rhetorically is, how well are we doing with sort of ensuring that those answers trickle down to our rank and file people? Because in my opinion, if they were trickling down, some of us as board members would not be getting the volume and type of questions that we're getting asked, and feeling compelled to ask, here at our board meeting. So again, I know I can do better. I know I can do better in communicating with you all, my colleagues, as well as our administration, and I will endeavor, and AEA as well. I mean, I will strive to continue to improve in that regard. But again, I just want to sort of humbly ask that we all kind of, strive to do that better as we move forward.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. Anyone else? Okay, well, hearing none, thank you for the presentation and for entertaining all of the questions and comments from the board. We appreciate you taking the time to do that. Our next item on the agenda is under new business. We actually have 2 items, and I know we've spent a lot of time talking about the reopening plan. We do have normal business of the board as well, which includes superintendent and treasurer evaluations. All of you should have received and seen your email about the that I sent, sort of explaining the general process. You also received emails from the superintendent and treasurer with their most recent evaluation, as well as a blank template for your use. And just to remind you, the typical process is for each of you to use that blank template to go through that and answer the questions the best you can. You can answer some, you can answer all, you can leave comments, accolades, as well as criticisms or areas where you would like to see continued improvement. We will then collect all of those responses, and the superintendent and treasurer, because it is their evaluation, will designate who they would like to collect those responses. All of the responses from you will be compiled into one final draft copy, which will then be redistributed back to you so that you can see your comments alongside every other board member's comments. And then we will schedule a special meeting. Typically, this is done separately as a special meeting to go through and do an in-person evaluation and review of all of the comments. We'll go through typically page by page. We'll allow board members to kind of highlight certain comments that they've made on the evaluations. And so we'll get that scheduled once we start collecting the responses. I'd like to give anyone a chance to ask any questions they have about the process, and we'll do our best to answer those if you have any. Or any questions about the instruments themselves?
Yeah, I just have, oh, sorry, Diana.
We haven't set a due date, Ms. Autry. Ms. Autry asked when they would be due back. We wanted to get them to you first and make sure that everyone had a chance to look at them. We'll typically do that within a week or two, probably 2 weeks at this point. We need to get past the reopening. That'll give us a chance to spend some time looking at them, and feel free to reach out if you have any other questions as well, but probably about 2 weeks, I would say. Dr. Akbar?
Yes, I took a look at the evaluation, and I wondered if there was a way to update the evaluation for this year. There didn't seem to be a way of rating it on a scale, like a Likert type scale, or anything like that. It just seemed like something that you provide comments. And I think that it would be an added benefit for there to be an additional rating ability. Because right now it didn't look like there was ratings at all. And I also wasn't sure about where the categories or standards came from. So I wanted to talk through that. And also the last thing is I didn't see the goals set for last year. And so I think that it will be hard to do an evaluation without really fully knowing what the goals were set from last year. I hope all that makes sense.
Yes, and we can get you some information on the last set of goals that were set, and we'll make sure that that gets out to everyone. And I'll let the superintendent and treasurer jump in. Statute sets some of the goalposts for the superintendent and treasurer evaluations. The instruments themselves, it's been a few years since we've reevaluated the actual instruments. It might not be a bad idea to add that as an agenda item for our retreat as well. We've typically brought in consultants that have assisted with that. I think Chuck Parsons, who's a former superintendent, was maybe even the last consultant that was brought in. And again, using state statutes as a goal, as a guide, and then supplementing that with how we would like the review to look built around that. But I'll let Dr. James and Mr. Pendleton jump in if they'd like to add anything.
Yeah, that's correct, Mr. President. A lot of the one document that I sent were the included the Superintendent Standards, which, you know, are somewhat dated, but those are in the Ohio Revised Code, and through that Ohio Leadership Advisory Council came up with that instrument based on state superintendent evaluation standards.
Mr. Pendleton, did you want to add anything about the treasurer's evaluation?
It was jointly developed with BASA at similar times around that same set of standards. It's a process that OSBA adapted as well. I think back in the last time they updated their evaluation system was in 2019, and these model that.
Okay, and I think based on Dr. Akbar's questions, I think it might be something good for us to also add into our retreat to see if there's any room for us to take a fresh look at those evaluations, at the actual instruments. I mean, obviously, we're still basing them on standards that are in the ORC, but we can certainly, there's room to work on the instrument itself, and it has changed a little bit over time, at least since I've been on the board. So let's add that as an agenda item. Any other questions on the evaluations? If you do have any, please feel free to reach out to me or to the superintendent and treasurer directly. Again, to Ms. Autry's point, we haven't set a date yet, but we will set that now that you all have the instruments. We'll make sure, I'll look through them again. We'll make sure we send you any information on the prior goals. They should be in there. If we have to go back one more set, maybe we send yet the set that were done before that as well. And then once we start collecting them back, we'll poll everyone for dates for a special board meeting to get the in-person evaluations completed. All right, next item under new business is item 30.1, the I Promise School 2020-2021 calendar modification.
In the folder, there is a board letter. There's an MOU that was actually signed off today. We've conferred with the I Promise School for this year, and this year only. They would like to follow the calendar that the rest of the district is following. They were scheduled to return to school July 27th. Based on everything that's going on, they would like to mirror our calendar for when we start the school year, and that just for this year until we get through this whole COVID pandemic.
Thank you so much. You have the resolution under item 30.1 as well as the supporting documentation. Do we have a motion on that resolution?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion from Ms. McKittrick, a second by Dr. Akbar. Are there any comments, questions, or further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Bravo?
Yes.
Dr. Hall?
Aye.
Mrs. Mansfield?
Yes.
Mrs. McKittrick?
Yes.
Dr. Akbar?
Yes.
Mr. Alexander? Apologize, I understand. I believe. Ms. Autry?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have a need for an executive session pursuant to Ohio Revised Code section 21.223 to meet with the board legal counsel to discuss disputes involving the board and or the school district that are the subject of pending or imminent court action. Do we have a motion?
We have a motion. So moved. So moved.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Ms. Autry, second by Dr. Akbar. Are there any final comments, questions, or discussion before we recess into executive session? Hearing and seeing none, the only thing I would like to say is, again, for those people that are watching this meeting, I appreciate you sticking with us. Lots of important discussion taking place, and we will return from executive session, and I do believe we have one item that we will be considering once we return. So we'll ask all of our board members to make sure to completely log out of this meeting when we do. Sign into the executive session, and then we'll come back afterward. With that, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Dr. Hall?
Aye.
Mrs. Mansfield?
Yes.
Mrs. Patrick?
Yes.
Dr. Akbar?
Yes.
Ms. Autry?
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Bravo?
All right, thank you. We are recessed and return shortly. Thank you, and welcome back to the regular session of the Akron Public School Board regular meeting for July 13th, 2020. We have one final item on the agenda, and that is a recommendation for the settlement agreement and release that is included in your board packet. Do we have a motion on that item?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Dr. Akbar, a second by Ms. McKittrick. All right. Any comments, questions, or discussion before we vote? Hearing and seeing none, roll call, please.
Dr. Hall?
Aye.
Mrs. Mansfield?
Yes.
Mrs. McKittrick?
Yes.
Dr. Akbar?
Yes.
Ms. Autry?
Yes.
Mr. Bravo?
Aye.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else to come before this board before we would adjourn? Hearing and seeing none, I would just like to say thank you to all of you for a fantastic meeting. Lots of good discussion. Very good questions. Appreciate it. I know it's late. It's 9:45. We don't have these very often, but when we do, I think they're worth it. And I really appreciated hearing from all of you. So thank you. With that, we'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thanks. We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. We are adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.